Okay, let's get it. Self-chosen identification and portrayal. Before I get started, I want to make a disclosure. I am not a fan of the description Black or African American, and truth be told, I'm really not impressed with the term African. And let me quickly explain why. None of these terms, from my knowledge, are terms which we came up with to define ourselves. They are all terms which Europeans chose to describe us, and in my mind, anything that they call us is wrong and can't be trusted, as the purpose behind all they do is self-serving with the hopes of keeping us in the dark or disconnected from our roots. And this might be my active imagination, but the word Black, when you break it down, contains the word lack, which means a state of being without or not having enough of something. Add be in front of lack, and now you have the word black, or be lacking, which is a word used to describe a whole group of people in the United States. We must remember to be mindful when speaking words into the universe, as words have power and make things materialize. So for a considerable amount of time now, Black people have self-appropriated that we are a race of people that be lacking. And no, I don't agree with that. So now you see why I don't really like the title. Plus, we're not Black. We are a multicolored hue of people. Now, the word African American is not so bad, but still and yet, it's not a label we chose for ourselves. Here's where I have a problem with the word African, which in turn makes me have a problem with the word African American. Note that nowhere is it mentioned that the entire continent of Africa was named by anybody of African descent. Supposedly it was either named after some Roman general whose last name was Africanus, or it has been said to derive from the Roman name for a tribe living in northern Tunisia, who were called the Afir, or from the Greek word apharik, meaning without cold or without horror, which further supports the fact that prior to contact with Europeans, by their own accounts, Africa was not a place of horror and depression like it is portrayed today. But for the purpose of this video, and until I come up with a term that I'm comfortable with describing us, I will continue to use Black, African American, and African. So the purpose of this video is to express how important it is for Black people, peoples of the African-Diaspora, or Africans, to start taking control of the images which are projected of us in all aspects around the globe. I will start with a slight introduction, then I will state the issue that is perplexing to me. Next, I will state what I feel is the cause of the problem. Then, of course, I'm going to give what I consider to be the solution. So, upon a recent trip to Europe, I was put into deep thought concerning images, sculptures, and what is considered to be some of the best art in terms of African art. It should be mentioned that because I consider myself a history geek, and think of myself as a self-taught anthropologist, archaeologist, it was a privilege to have been able to visit several of what are supposed to be high-profile museums with an extensive collection of art from cultures and places from around the world, like the New York Metropolitan Museum, which is here in the States, but the British Museum and Louvre Museum in Paris. And I have to say, for better or worse, the Louvre Museum is pretty amazing, if for nothing else than for its sheer size and amount of art it has collected, or depending on how you look at it, stolen during the country's years of conquest and colonization to become one of the world's so-called superpowers. Now, these museums are some of the most popular in the world and are visited by millions each year, and once again are supposed to contain some of the best African art outside of Africa, right? Now, this is where the problem starts for me. The problem is that after visiting these museums, I always walk away feeling uneasy, misrepresented, confused, and for a lack of better words, disrespected. After visiting these places, I'm always projected into deep thought. The reasons I feel disrespected is because even on the highest levels, African people are displayed and portrayed in subhuman, savage ways centered around the objectification of our bodies. West Africans, or people of the African diaspora, are hardly, if ever, put on display for our cultural achievements, which contribute to the progress of the peoples of this earth. Concerning matters such as the remains of architecture and structures of master planned cities to house thousands, or the mastering of agriculture and cultivation to feed those thousands, or better yet, the medicinal and medical knowledge to keep thousands alive within these cities, or us just being strategic enough to produce warriors or militaries to protect these cities. And this is where the contradictions and feelings of disrespect come into play for me. Because in order for Africa to grow, to be so strong and so many in numbers, certain achievements would have had to have been in place for this to be possible. Because if you recall, one of the main reasons colonizing European countries such as Britain, Spain, and France went to the west coast of Africa was because there was a large population of people healthy and strong enough to be utilized as a cheap and reliable source of labor. Per different sources, an estimated 12.5 million people were taken from Africa between the 15th and 18th century. That's a lot of surplus people that the continent lost, while still having a large population of people left behind. When you do the math, the peoples of the west coast of Africa were able to grow in numbers that would not have been possible without them possessing abilities similar to those so proudly and abundantly put on display concerning cultures like the Assyrians, the ancient Romans and Greeks and different Asian cultures. So why is the history and achievements which made African people so strong not put on display instead of images surrounding our bodies? Now, if you notice, I didn't mention Egypt because, of course, Egyptian artifacts and their cultural contributions can never be negated, which is why Europeans try to separate Egypt and its people from sub-Saharan African countries. I also didn't mention the Kush, Nubian, or East African people from the Sudan or the Abyssinian Ethiopian empires, because despite the fact that they are in Africa, they are displayed more respectively. So on that note, let me clarify that I'm talking about the negative portrayal of people coming from the so-called sub-Saharan countries of West Africa, which make up the majority of the African diaspora, from countries such as Ghana, Benin, Togo, Nigeria, Cameroon, and the Congo. And while I am not really a fan of the term sub-Saharan either, as it also sounds subhuman to me, and because I'm almost certain it was put into circulation by Europeans to separate African peoples on the continent from each other for their magnificent purposes, I will use it for interchangeably for the purpose of this video. And to quickly touch on why North and East African art is displayed more respectively, in my opinion, is because the Africans of East Africa did not make up the Africans of the African diaspora. Thus, it was unnecessary to completely downplay or eradicate their achievements. However, it was necessary to negate West African achievements with the hopes of its people never knowing what positive contributions they're truly capable of, which makes it easier for them to better accept their previous and continued condition as basically slaves or just pitiful subjects. The message is accept the fact that you are only good for your flesh and a source of entertainment, and how it can be used to serve others. And of course, I have my opinion on the connection between West Africa and Egypt, but well, that's another video for another day and time. Now, moving on, it is understood that civilizations rise and fall in terms of enlightenment and knowledge. But if you notice, it seems as if West Africa never had a peak of knowledge similar to others. So my question is this true, or is this simply how they choose to portray us? Now, I must mention that my dislike for how black people are portrayed was found bothersome and unjust way before I made it to any museum, as I have been confronted on a daily basis for most of my conscious life on how negatively we are seen and portrayed overall. One would say that I'm overly sensitive or maybe easily offended, but I know that's a lie, and it's been confirmed by visiting such places as the museums that I mentioned. But just for kicks and giggles, let's name a few obvious disrespectful portrayals, and let's start with the media, as there are so many. The most popular, in my opinion, is the loud mouth, big booty, weave wearing, always got a problem with everything and everybody, mad at the world black woman. And it's sad to say, but the objectification of our bodies, especially the black woman's body, falls in line with many of the African art images I've seen at the museums. Here's another. The hip-hop rapping, flashy dressing, overly aggressive, pronounced sexual appetite and preference for light-skinned or women of other nationalities, or either the gang-affiliated, penitentiary-bound hood black man that just can't seem to get it together due to his many shortcomings. And while we as a people have our issues and how we are portrayed is not completely false, the portrayal of us, whether through the media or just how it's assumed we live in everyday life, is often overly exaggerated and disrespectful, and has been allowed to grow and fester with the hopes that we stay brainwashed and continue to be a source of profit for other nationalities. Of course, other nationalities that don't have our best interests at heart. And the sad part is that moguls of all kind find people of African descent hungry to succeed and blinded by monetary gain to fall in line and sell negative images of their own people. I could elaborate more, but you get the picture, and the topic of perpetuating negative images of ourselves is also another video for another time. So with all that being said, here's what I feel like the solution is. The solution is simple, which is that peoples of Africa and the African diaspora have to start taking control of our own images and define who we are by ourselves for ourselves. Now, I understand that not all peoples of the diaspora care how the world sees us. Many of us feel there are more important issues to worry about on a daily basis than to care about how museums display us. But let me explain why this is important. Because whether peoples of the African diaspora realize it or not, there are still quite a few places in the world where people of other nationalities have little to no contact with black people. Thus, many of the times, some of their first impressions of black people are images brought to them by non-black people who pick and choose how they want Africans to be portrayed. And often the portrayals are negative and presented in a way which places us beneath other peoples, which in turn leads to the constant disrespect and ill treatment many of us experience in life. So if you care and question the ill treatment when you walk into establishments to spend your money, or you question why other nationalities feel we don't value education or value family like they do, remember it's how we are portrayed. Or if you care that other nationalities take you serious when it's time to sing and dance and dribble a basketball or party, but they have a hard time taking you serious when you speak of opening your own grocery store, hospital, or school in your neighborhood, then I got news for you, which is that you care and should want images of African people to be displayed in such a manner that our abilities to accomplish on the merits of our minds and not the exploitations of our bodies is respected and taken serious. We must remember that conquerors and winners of wars get to write history, and in doing so, the winner always portrays himself in the best light possible, like how Europeans portray themselves as bringers of knowledge and civilization, while his conquered subjects are displayed as savage people in need of saving. And that pretty much describes the images I have observed of African people in what are supposed to be some of the most prestigious museums in the world. I am truly disappointed by how African people are portrayed, and it leaves to question, who are we really? And that it's not a question for Europeans to answer, or for people of other nationalities to provide images or tell people of African descent who they are. They have done it for long enough, which has been a form of psychological warfare, further aiding in the confusion and stagnation of African people. Now look, one final thought. I asked the question, who are we really, again? Because while we claim to be a great people, how are we really that great when we don't care about our past and we're content with letting others define us, with letting other people define us? So check it. Our existence goes well past the 400 years of Western slavery. We are an ancient people with an ancient history. So why don't we care about our history or archaeology or anthropology or about simply rediscovering our past? Why is it that is always a pink skin on the History Channel explaining Africa to African people? That's amazing. That's amazing to me. Our lack of interest to define ourselves and break completely free of this Western matrix that they've created for us is puzzling to me. It makes me question if maybe, just maybe, it's possible that we're scared to discover that maybe we are actually nothing more than a people who were harvested, exploited, and thus contribute nothing more than our flesh to this game, which is why we have no interest in digging any further for the truth. Or are we just so overwhelmed with the present, with our iPhones and fast moving lives, or just thoughts of the future, that we simply don't care about the past? And my answer to that is, it doesn't matter what the outcome may be. What is important is that African people take control and ownership of how we are seen and portrayed, and that we illustrate our own stories, whether good or bad. It is absolutely ridiculous to let peoples who have destroyed, pillaged, and benefited off our suffering to tell us who we are. And on an end note, this quote comes to mind. And so, it's an old quote, kind of cliche. It's been around for quite some time, but I mean, it's true. It holds validity. It holds weight. It's a true statement, which is that if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. If you don't know where you're from, you don't know where you're going, right? So, and I know I'm not the only one who would hate for 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century slavery to return. And while I'm aware that we're all still in a form of slavery, in a form of bondage, nobody wants that type of I know I don't, that type of slavery to return. So African people have to get off of what I would say is like repeat. We have to know as much as possible so that we can do better, right? So whatever the outcome, we must seek, rediscover, and learn how to define who we are for ourselves. It's just that simple. Because I like, this is the little phrase that comes to mind is like that little Kendrick Lamar song, All of the Stars Are Closer. He says, one of the lines go, I want the credit, whether I'm winning or I'm losing. On my mama, that's the real shit, right? And that's the real shit. So it's like, no matter what the outcome may be, no, good, bad, pretty, ugly, sweet, sour, smart, dumb, whatever the outcome may be, smart, stupid, it don't matter. Whatever the outcome may be, it's our story. It's for us to tell. And that's basically it. So until next time, adios.